37. That's the number of World Championship medals Simone Biles has won across her career. 7 of those are named after her, because no other human being on Earth has been able to execute the skills she invented. Not one. The International Gymnastics Federation didn't just give her gold. They gave her the permanent record of what a human body is capable of doing. For 20 years, the sports world built a single story around Simone Biles, and that story went like this. Some athletes are good, some are great, some are legends. And then, at a level that existed entirely alone, there was her. The most studied, the most decorated, the most filmed, the most celebrated American athlete of the last 2 decades. Coaches studied the slow-motion footage of her vaults frame by frame. Scientists published papers on her spatial awareness. Young girls in 40 countries pinned her photo to their bedroom walls because she represented the clearest possible answer to the question of what a human body could do if you pushed it hard enough, long enough, without stopping. And then Simone Biles went to a hospital. And she said 3 words that none of those papers, none of those slow-motion replays, none of those bedroom wall photos had prepared anyone to hear. I almost died. Not a metaphor, not athletic hyperbole. 3 words spoken by the woman the world had spent 20 years convincing itself was different, was beyond, was, in some fundamental way, untouchable by the things that stop the rest of us. If Simone Biles ever made you believe that some human beings were simply built beyond ordinary limits, leave a like right now as a tribute to the woman who proved that belief wrong in the most frightening way possible. Because what you are about to hear, very few people know. Simone Ariane Biles was born on March 14, 1997, in Columbus, Ohio. By the time she was 3 years old, her mother's struggles with addiction had made it impossible for her to raise 4 children. Simone and her siblings entered the foster care system. They lived there for years, until her grandparents, Ron and Nellie Biles, drove from Texas, took the children in, and eventually adopted Simone and her sister Adria. She was 6 years old when her life restarted in Spring, Texas. She discovered gymnastics almost by accident, a daycare field trip to a local gym when she was 6. The coaches there sent a letter home that same week, asking if she wanted to train formally. That letter is, in retrospect, one of the most consequential pieces of paper in the history of American sport. By age 8, she was competing. By 14, she was training 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, at a facility outside Houston under coach Amy Borman. The rest of the gymnastics world was watching a prodigy accelerate towards something they didn't yet have a name for. At 16, she won her first all-around title at the World Championships. Then, she did it again at 17, and 18, and 19. Each year, the performances became something the sport had never categorized before. The Biles on floor, the Biles Tuiku on beam, the Yurchenko double pike on vault. Skills so technically demanding, so physically extreme, that the Federation named them after her simply because no one else had ever attempted them in competition. The 2016 Rio Olympics were, by every objective measure, a coronation. 4 gold medals, 1 bronze, a team performance that made the American squad look like it was competing in a different sport than everyone else. She came home to a ticker tape parade in New York, endorsement deals, magazine covers, and the kind of cultural moment that turns an athlete into an institution. The world had its narrative. Simone Biles was not like the rest of us. She was built differently. She operated at a frequency the rest of the sport couldn't reach. And that narrative felt true because the evidence for it was overwhelming, and the evidence against it was carefully, quietly held away from every camera and every microphone. Then came 2021, the Tokyo Olympics, and the moment the narrative paused, on the day of the team final, in front of a global audience, Simone withdrew from the event. She cited her mental health. She withdrew from the individual all-around final the next day. Then the vault. Then the uneven bars. Then the floor exercise. She competed only in the balance beam final and won bronze. The world reacted with confusion, with admiration, with debate. But what the world didn't see, what Simone herself would only begin to speak about in fragments over the years that followed, was that Tokyo wasn't where the weight began. Tokyo was just where it finally became too heavy to hide. What the body carries. There is a version of Simone Biles that the world knows in extraordinary detail. The slow-motion replays, the frame-by-frame breakdowns, the biomechanics papers, the footage of her launching herself off a 4-inch beam at speeds and angles that make sports scientists stop and recalculate. That version is real. Every number attached to it is accurate. But there is another version, the one that existed in the same body, at the same time, behind the same performances. And that version was never filmed. Elite artistic gymnastics is one of the most physically demanding disciplines in professional sport. Not because of a single dramatic moment of impact, but because of accumulation. Years of it. A gymnast at Simone's level trains through pain that most professional athletes would consider career-ending. Stress fractures are managed, not rested. Joint degradation is tracked, not stopped. The nervous system absorbs thousands of high-impact landings per year, on ankles, on knees, on a spine that is asked to rotate and compress and extend in ways that have no equivalent outside the sport. Simone Biles began serious training at 8 years old. By the time she stood on the floor in Tokyo at 24, her body had been operating at elite level for 16 years. 16 years of 6-day training weeks. 16 years of landings. 16 years of the physical arithmetic that the medal count and the slow-motion footage never showed. The world saw the performance. It never saw the invoice. Tokyo and the weight that followed. What happened in Tokyo has been discussed, analyzed, and debated more than almost any single moment in modern Olympic history. But the conversation almost always centers on the decision itself: to withdraw, to prioritize mental health, to choose self-preservation over competition. What gets discussed less is what came before that decision, and what came after. Simone has spoken, in interviews and in her own documentary, about the twisties, a phenomenon unique to gymnastics, where an athlete loses spatial awareness mid-air. Not a fear of heights, not nerves, a genuine neurological disconnect between what the body is doing and what the brain can track. For a gymnast executing a vault at full speed, the twisties are not a performance problem. They are a safety emergency. She felt them in Tokyo. She withdrew, and the world argued about what that meant. But here is what the argument missed. The twisties don't arrive without warning. They arrive at the intersection of physical exhaustion, accumulated stress, and a nervous system that has been asked to perform past its limit for too long. They are a signal. The body sending a message that the mind has been trained for years to override. Simone had been overriding that message for a long time before Tokyo. The years between Tokyo and Paris were, publicly, a story of recovery and return. She stepped away from competition. She spoke about therapy, about processing, about giving herself permission to be something other than the greatest gymnast in the world for the first time in her adult life. She married NFL player Jonathan Owens in April of 2023. She found something that looked, from the outside, like peace. But the body doesn't forget what it's been asked to carry. The ledger doesn't close because the competition schedule pauses. When Simone returned to elite competition in 2023 and 2024, the performances were extraordinary, arguably better, technically, than anything she had produced before Tokyo. She won the World Championship all-around title in 2023. She arrived at the Paris Olympics in the summer of 2024 as the most anticipated athlete at the Games. She won 4 medals. Gold in the team final, gold in the individual all-around, gold on vault, gold on floor. The world celebrated. The narrative of invincibility, the one that Tokyo had briefly interrupted, came roaring back with more force than ever. And then, weeks later, came the hospital. I almost died. The details Simone has shared publicly are what they are. She described a serious health scare. She described returning urgently to the hospital. She said, in her own words, the 3 words that reframed everything the world thought it understood about what the last decade of her life had actually cost. I almost died. She was 29 years old. She had 37 World Championship medals. She had a body that had been studied by scientists, celebrated by millions, and pushed, for 23 years, to the outermost boundary of what human physiology can sustain. And she almost died. Not as a metaphor for the pressure she'd carried, not as a description of what Tokyo had felt like emotionally, as a literal account of what happened to her body. The body the world had spent 2 decades treating as evidence that some people were simply beyond the ordinary limits that govern the rest of us. There is a specific cruelty in that gap, between the narrative the world built around her and the reality her body was carrying underneath it. The world needed Simone Biles to be invincible because it needed proof that pure dedication, pure talent, pure will could lift a human being above ordinary limits. She gave the world that proof. Year after year, competition after competition, movement after movement. The invoice arrived anyway. It always does. There is a photograph that exists in every form of media that has ever covered Simone Biles. You've seen it, or some version of it. She's in the air. The angle is impossible. The height is wrong. Too high, too rotated, too far past the point where any reasonable calculation of human physics says she should be able to land safely. And she lands. Perfectly. Every time. That image became a symbol, not just of athletic excellence, but of something the public needed to believe. That there existed, somewhere in the world, a human being who had genuinely transcended the limitations the rest of us live inside. The world built that symbol carefully. Over 2 decades, with medals and slow-motion replays and scientific papers and magazine covers, and a generation of young girls who grew up watching her and concluded that if you wanted something badly enough, if you worked hard enough, if you were built the right way, you could become untouchable. Simone Biles performed that symbol, because it was also, in many ways, true. And because the sport, the industry, and the audience rewarded her for it in every way available to them. But a symbol cannot go to a hospital. A symbol cannot say, I almost died from a bed in a facility that exists precisely because bodies, all bodies, without exception, regardless of what they have accomplished or what they have been trained to endure, have limits that no amount of will or dedication can permanently suspend. The woman in that hospital was not the greatest gymnast of all time. She was not 37 World Championship medals. She was not the Biles 2, or the Yurchenko double pike. She was Simone, 29 years old, in a hospital, saying 3 words that undid, with more force than any medal had built, the narrative the world had spent 2 decades constructing around her. I almost died. Not a confession. Not a collapse. The most honest thing she has ever said publicly. And the thing that finally, completely, made her human in the way she always was. The world just needed 20 years and a hospital bed to hear it. Drop a comment below. Did you know any of this before today? Because most people didn't. Like and subscribe if this hit different. Because we have more real stories behind the icons the world thinks it knows every single week.